Retro anime. How did we find it? How does it hold up? Unpacking the ins and outs of being an old school nerd and proving that 80s kids can't remember a damn thing right. These are the mindless midlife musings of the anime nerd.
Welcome to Mindless Midlife Musings of the Anime Nerd. I'm Rick, and with me as always are Vic and Brian. Today marks the launch of this podcast, and we're talking about what happened with anime. It went from a niche underground nerd fandom and evolved into a massive multimedia industry juggernaut that is now literally everywhere. And it certainly feels like we've been fans forever, and suddenly, I don't want to speak for you guys, but I'm completely lost and feel stuck outside the fandom most of the time. So, what just happened? Gentlemen?
I like the fact that you said we're always, and it said, this is the first episode.
You're always with me. I mean, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you guys.
They're like, you know what? No lies have been told. No lies have been told so far. Yeah.
We've been friends since grade school. I figure you're always with me.
I think that's important to state that fact that we have not just fallen into anime. We've been here.
Before it even had a name.
Yeah, before I remember it being known as Japanimation, Japanime. All the various names that it had, adult animation. So many weird ones.
Yeah. That we had to actually give it a pronoun to say it was Japanese anime or Japanese animation. Now people like anime. You're like, cool, yeah. I will leave it alone.
It's true, yeah. Everybody these days knows it. They know it by name. They understand exactly what they're getting into with it. But yeah, I mean, for us, it was, did you see that cartoon? And everybody's like, oh yeah, I totally watched that. That was different. Yeah, sure was. I guess it's a little bit of backstory on us is probably a good idea. We all grew up together in South Florida, and I don't mean South Florida. I mean
the South
Florida, like the southest Florida.
The southest, southingly, southest Florida you could possibly south.
Before you hit an island, like we're as south as it got.
Yeah, any further south and you're in the water.
Yeah, so
any further south, you're in Cuba.
So we had a unique experience growing up together because of where we lived. Miami, Florida being such a melting pot of society and cultures that you would think that it would have been a lot easier to get this kind of stuff. But boy, you could not be further from the truth on that one.
Anything way harder.
Yeah. So I think maybe we can start by kind of talking about what animation was like for us there. I mean, we're all children of the 70s who grew up in the 80s and entered adulthood in the 90s. So we are the first audience, I would like to say, probably the first audience for anime.
I agree.
I wouldn't say the first audience per se, but as far as U.S. viewership, quite possibly.
Definitely.
On the first, for sure.
And we're talking about like stuff like not even like Google. We're talking about like who were the, I guess, Battle Beyond the Stars. Am I saying that one right?
Yeah, you're talking about Yamato, right? But back then we called it like Star Blazers, and then there was Battle of the Planets, which was
also known as G-Force, and then Gotcha Man.
Right. I remember in Rick and I have a very unique history where we both lived in Spain. And one of the things about living in Spain is that we lived on a military base, and you did not actually have access. The only thing you had over there was Spanish, Spanish media. So unless you brought it over on VHS, it was very few and hard to get new stuff. But I remember the first anime that I actually watched was Captain Harlock.
Nice. Captain Harlock. Yeah, I didn't hit Captain Harlock until a little later. I think back when I was in Spain before it all. The oldest thing I remember was like those and I don't remember the name, and maybe a listener or somebody can help me out with this, but it was a dog that was a Three Musketeer kind of character, and that was probably, and I used to watch it in Spanish. That was probably the first thing I ever watched that I'm fairly certain that was an anime, because it just wasn't the usual Saturday morning cartoon flair.
Oh
But
my god!
Astro Boy was another one that
Right?
that was pretty clear. And of course, everybody who grew up in our era knows Speed Racer.
Everybody
Like,
knows, yeah.
Yeah.
everyone.
But it
So
was it was interesting how as I think about it, Harlock was just the way it fell into our into my viewership on my radar was weird. Again, I was living on a military base in Torrejon Air Force Base in Madrid, Spain, and somebody from the States brought over a VHS, and I was watching the VHS, and that means that had to come from Japan over to the States, back to here.
that VHS had been on a journey.
Yeah,
It's seen things.
it went through custom. It was X-rayed.
So what did you think about Captain Harlock? What was it about that resonated with you that made you think, "Holy crap, this is different"?
Deep down, I always loved. It was the ship, the Yamato, right? That was it. That was the name of the ship, right?
Yeah.
I think his ship was the Yamato or
Oh
the
wait,
Arcadia?
I don't remember now. Was it the Yamato or was it the Arcadia?
Arcadia. I think it was Arcadia. So the Arcadia was basically it looked like a World War II diesel submarine, and they put jet engines on there on the back of it. I was like, "That's my." There we go.
I just looked it up too. I cheated. Yeah, it was definitely the Arcadia.
Oh, good. There you
Nailed
go.
it.
Vic's going to be our fact finder for
We
this
need
episode.
that. So the second thing about it was, I loved his sword. It looked like a rapier, but it had a cannon at the end of it. So in sword fighting, next to the hood to point and shoot somebody. I'm like, a gunblade. Way before.
Yeah, way before Final Fantasy did.
Yeah, way before Final Fantasy did it. Captain Harlock had it.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I think I think one of the things that made anime different about or for us back then was the serialization of it. How
Yeah, you technically had to watch it in order, or you're missing huge parts of story.
Exactly. Yeah, cartoons like He-Man, it was episode to episode. Didn't matter. There was no overreaching story arc. You could watch any episode, pick it up, and be fine.
Yeah.
Whereas like Harlock or Go Lion, Voltron, to all of us Americanized nerds, it was like you had to watch, or you had no idea what the hell was going on.
Yeah, and even Voltron was written in a way where you could watch it out of order, but if you miss too much, you'll miss something further down the line. But then you had other shows like, oh god, I'm drawing a blank now, but other shows where you absolutely had to watch everything in order, like in Robotech.
Yeah,
that made it over here. And well, we're not going to discuss Harmony Gold right now, but
we'll get there.
The fact that if you missed an episode, you missed 24 minutes of story.
Yeah, and I feel like that was what made it different. I think the Japanese were less afraid to engage with their audience. Americans, in my experience, have this tendency of wanting to keep their kids, so they're afraid to engage them with storylines about heavier material. I mean, that it wasn't until they passed that law in the 80s that they had to start including a point to cartoons other than selling you a toy.
Yeah.
So, it wasn't until then that you got and knowing is half the battle stuff.
That's a very interesting point. I like that point about the selling a toy.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's all it was, right? That's all what American cartoons were. They were just selling toys.
So this is my first then versus now.
Yeah.
My first one. In America, we had to deal with the whole marketing out of it. Matter of fact, there are so many videos about what was the purpose of this cartoon, and that it really was just to sell toys. Okay, but then when you look at the motivation behind the the protagonist of before anime, earlier anime versus anime now, I feel like anime now is really doing it. Is really trying to make that samurai feel, where everybody is like, I want to be the samurai, or I want to be the best at what I do. You know, and I'm devoting my entire craft to it. But at some point in time, that's not the way it always was. Especially when you're dealing with people like homeboy from Robotech, Rick Hunter. He wasn't trying to be the best at
That's true.
He was all about me. Let me even say, the only one who was trying, who wasn't trying to be the best, who was the best, was Roy.
And Roy wasn't even sober half the time.
Right. So, but you understand what I'm saying? There's a huge difference in between what is the motivation of the protagonist in anime now, no matter what. Black Clover, I want to be the best. My Hero Academia, I want to be the best. Naruto, they are, hell, even in Food Wars, I want to be the best.
Well, I would definitely in a lot of the popular ones, the protagonist definitely wants to be the best. I mean, but now, as opposed to before, now we have access to so much more. I mean, right now, between 3 anime subscriptions, I'm literally blowing 6 hours a week bare minimum, trying to catch up with everything that's new.
Sweet
and
baby Jesus.
A lot of it's like not where in the 80s where everyone was, oh God, how do I say this? Where everyone was, it was about, making things better or, protecting something from something.
Right.
Oh, you had
Right. And
you
that's
had to
pretty much all that was ever released was all the action stuff, all the,
right.
all that kind of stuff. Whereas now it's like we have access to pretty much every possible genre under the sun.
Yeah, I feel like that's definitely a talking point here. The then versus now. So back then, getting anime was an ordeal. You had to make a deal with a Japanese studio. You had to, which usually involved going there.
I like how you say,
talking
it's not even just the studio. You also had to get rights to the music and
hold on. I
think
think we need to say it's not like we as the purveyors or we weren't doing this. Somebody.
No, absolutely somebody, not me. Yeah. Like Robert Woodhead probably over at Animego, but somebody had to go over to Japan and make these deals to get this content, and then they had to bring masters with them over here. And then either if you were subtitling it, literally, it's not like they had scripts; they had to just watch it, and they would subtitle based on what they heard. Or if they were lucky enough to get scripts, then they could go off of that. But I mean, even the technology to make subtitles didn't exist at the time. So most of the time, you were better off just dubbing, especially the older stuff.
Yeah, so subtitles were possible back then, but it wasn't like a cakewalk like it is now. You just go into your favorite video editor and just type away, and you're done. It's it was you needed specialized hardware for it back then, as opposed to now. It's a piece of cake.
So back then, when you had to invest that much time, money, and effort into bringing a title from another country over here, you wanted to pick something you knew would make a bang. You wanted to pick something you knew could win, right? Mm-hmm. Because you were up against things with toy lines. You were up against G.I. Joe. You were up against Transformers. You were up against He-Man. And as much as we want to talk about Transformers being an anime, we will get to it. It is animated by Japanese, but that it was homegrown. It was made here based on lots of weird toy deals.
Well, it's kind of funny that you bring that aspect up because a lot of studios, a lot of animation that wasn't geared toward the Japanese. So things like, first one that comes to head, Jason the Wheeled Warriors and Silverhawks. A lot of those were animated by Japanese studios.
Right.
But
created here.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, and I feel like that's we will get to those too. Rankin Bass is high up on my list
Rankin,
of
yeah.
things I revered as a child, and most of their stuff completely animated by Japanese and Korean studios.
Mhm.
So I think it's definitely worth talking about. But yeah, so that when you brought a title over, it had to be something just crazy. So back then, I would say late 70s, probably early, let's go 80s. It had to be something so bad crazy and new that nobody would touch you. And it wasn't like you had a toy line to go with it, and it wasn't like you had merch to go with it either. You were just bringing a title and hoping that it was awesome enough. So you usually, right, as an industry person would think, let's get the most bat crazy thing we can think of and bring it over here. So yeah, a lot of early anime titles, in my opinion, you guys challenge me on this if you disagree, were the more extreme things.
Oh yeah, that stuff that we had access to. Yeah, it was the hyper violent, the hypersexual. And I'm not
Right.
even talking about the actual adult stuff. It was insane, and they usually brought things that had shock value, and more importantly, wasn't 12 plus episodes. Anywhere
And
from just a couple of episodes to maybe a movie. Those are the kinds of things that they brought over at that time.
I absolutely agree, and I think that's one of the major differences between then and now. Now, anime is everywhere. Anime is a household name. Anime is on your phone. It's in your TV. It's even on Netflix. So now we're just inundated with anything and everything the industry can throw at us.
And honestly, and I think this is the difference between fringe and mainstream, because now that we are dealing with there, if I want to watch something about swords being a sword, just swords, kill a kill. I mean, you can go all through the whole gamut. Bleach. I mean, anything that has to do with the sword, boom, here you got. If you want to do something which is a period piece, oh my
You
gosh,
have it.
Berserk,
Hmm.
Ninja Scroll, Ninja Scroll. Wow, whoa, whoa, whoa,
Ninja Scroll. We'll get there.
Wow, 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 wow.
Yeah, it's like if you could think of a genre, it exists now and it's easily accessible.
It is. I mean, you brought up Food Wars before. Can you imagine? Just imagine something like Food Wars making it onto your Saturday morning UPN crawl.
Not
Right?
even
That's
remotely.
not gonna happen.
Not it. Maybe if Food
Even with all the
Network wanted to
necessary
do,
edits, they probably wouldn't.
like, if Food Network wanted to do a cartoon anime, maybe. But have
And
you?
I guess that's. Go ahead.
No lie, Food Wars is my. I can't tell you how many times. Matter of fact, last week, I was listening to them talk about how to fry something, and they said, "Yeah, we use potato starch." I looked at my pantry and was like, "I have mashed potatoes."
Well, here's the thing, Brian. Like, if I understood correctly, in the manga, they actually give you the recipes that they're showing.
Oh, you've just changed his whole world.
I
I
don't know
can't
how
wait to
true
the point.
that is, but from what I've heard and understood, it's like if you get the manga, it's in there.
I can't wait till we get to the point where we're doing videos so you guys can see my face when Vic drops and just my world up like that.
So now I don't want to veer too much into the modern. I do want to take this back. Now,
Go ahead.
back then, you didn't even know you were watching an anime.
No, it
Back
was
then,
just fancy cartoons.
you were just watching a cartoon that looked different.
Mhm.
Voltron looked vastly different than GI Joe. So most of the time, you would have to just catch it on your afternoon or early morning rotation. So I guess my question is to you guys: what were some of those anime that you would catch in your early morning rotations?
Oh God, I know
Voltron.
for a fact I missed the school bus. God knows how many times because of Robotech.
And Brian, you said Voltron, yeah?
Voltron.
Yeah.
Voltron was a good one. Voltron
G-Force.
aired usually before Robotech in South Florida at the time.
I am
Man.
trying to think. How did Speed Racer? How did
Speed Racer came on even earlier than that. So I ended up Speed Racer was one of the ones that I would catch, and it was always because I was the first one awake in the house, and it was on stupid early.
Right,
So I
right,
would
right.
catch it as I was getting ready.
Yeah, a lot of
And
stations back then would air cartoons starting in between 6 and 6:30 in the morning.
But they did all the like. Of course, it was the animes were first, and then you got into the morning to the rush. Yeah, I remember that now.
yeah, I don't know how to. I mean, I guess I would. This is pure conjecture. By the way, just as a general note, we're generally not going to be fact checking anything we say. this is this is just the way we remember it, and we could be completely wrong. And any listeners want to let us know that, fantastic. We will absolutely listen to the fact that we were wrong, but we're probably never going to admit it.
No, I have no problem admitting when I'm wrong. Like, I'm pretty. Like,
Hey,
for instance,
a lot of us have like real jobs, so at the end of the day, if we get something wrong, it happens.
Right.
this is mindless
These are
music.
mindless emphasis on mindless. So I feel like what happened is they needed to pad out their schedule, and so they would put the weird anime stuff early on because they knew they needed content to get going, but they knew their
The
market. They
cookie
knew
cutter
they,
stuff, though.
yeah, they
Again,
knew that their kids were
this
going to be awake
yeah, this
at a certain
was
time.
the this was nothing that was going to be nothing remotely close to like a PG-13.
Oh no, God,
No, it was
No.
not even.
It was something that was edited to hell for the fragile childlike minds of the 80s.
I feel the only exception to that was probably Robotech, and that's probably just laziness on a broadcaster's part because people got straight up killed in that show, and that was a first.
That was definitely one of the first where they were actually gone.
Right. So I feel like that just kind of got under the radar, but
Yeah, unlike
but yeah,
Ultron, where Sven disappeared.
yeah, he just I don't know what happened. He retired or something. And I'm when we do the Voltron episode, I can't wait. We're gonna definitely do it because I want to talk about that and I want to talk about the remake and all this stuff. But we can't do it today. Today we're just talking about then versus now.
Hey, Rick, you're doing a wonderful job of keeping us on track.
Because I know how all of us are. We will absolutely go off on a tangent, and we will never see it again.
We'll end up like in something from that was released like last week.
So now, one of the things that's interesting about anime in our childhood was how you could find it, which was to say you had to get lucky,
or your inability to find it.
Right? Because there was no. I know I don't want to be the old man yelling at a cloud, but there was no dang fangled internet. We didn't have that, and they sure as shit weren't talking about anime in the local paper. So the only way I didn't have that. The only way you found it was to stumble onto it or word of mouth.
Pretty much, yeah.
So here we come with it now, right? It was a height of pride for me as a father when my baby girl Alyssa, she was like, "Dad, I know what I want for my birthday." And I was like, "Okay, what do you want?" "I want a Crunchyroll subscription." I could not get my wallet out fast enough.
Parent of the year there, parent of the year.
Like, she said I wanted this Crunchyroll subscription. I was like, "You goddamn right you do, baby. Let's do this." I didn't even wait for her birthday. We did it that day.
That is fantastic.
So
it's awesome.
Man.
It's affordable too.
I don't even know if she still watches it. I know that I watch it, and I have not even bothered to ask whether or not she watches it. So I think I might have hijacked
Doesn't matter.
You're just assuming that she does. She was the pretense for getting it, and that's what she will remain.
Sweet.
Whether she watches it or not.
Sweet child.
But yeah, obtaining anime back then, Jesus. Usually it was knowing a friend that would lend you a VHS copy or something, or I actually knew someone that lent me a Laserdisc player.
They lent you a whole player.
I remember having access to Akira in like the very, very, very early 90s. So that was like first feeling of that.
The 90s was wild.
When we start talking about the 90s, that was game changer. Because that's when Well, honestly, that's when we hit high school in the early 90s.
Well,
We hit high school at the start of the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when, I got a car, right? And then it was it. All bets were off. It's like, where you want to go? Y'all want to go Cutler Ridge Mall and look at the stores for some anime?
but
No problem. Let's go. You want to drive up to Dayland?
it
Let's go.
changed also because right after that time, I don't think people realize exactly how influential, and just hear me out as I say this, right? How influential rap and hip hop was to breaking down the barriers to getting greater content overseas. For instance, in the 80s, we're dealing with Two Live Crew, NWA, and all the legal battles that they're fighting, saying, I want to be able to do what I want, say what I want here. Those battles get won, and it's like, yes, you have the freedom of speech. After that, we come to the golden age of content. And that is where people are like, you know what? I'm going to send you everything.
Hey, great. It's like, if I can license it, I'm going to bring it over and I'm going to give it to everyone.
I'm going to give it to everyone. And that's when, and again, this is when we came into age. And I think, personally, once those battles were fought, man, and I'll be the first to say, out of the three of us here, I was all about hentai. Judge your mama.
We were teenagers in the early 90s. We were all about hentai.
Like, it was our version.
Oh, that goes back to the shock value of this content that they were releasing. They needed something to hook people in.
Yeah.
It was
like that.
our version of Porky's, and we went the in.
But that stuff you couldn't just drive over to Camelot Music and pick that up off the shelf.
No.
You couldn't drive up to Dayland and hit Suncoast and pick that up off a shelf either. I mean, they had some stuff, but if you were looking for the really hard stuff, that wasn't easy to find.
At all.
I remember. What's that? Well, I'm sorry. What?
You can find it in Babbage's, which is
there you go.
But back then, when they sold video, you'd find some of the stuff there.
Yeah, it was a hunt. You would go out on a hunt. I liken it to vinyl collecting. Anybody who listening or here in the group that collects records in any capacity, it is a hunt to find it. And you got to find the shops that carry the kind of stuff you're interested in. You have to drive out to those shops. You got to dig through their bins. Anime was like that. There were no bins. There were just these tiny little shelves in the back of the store, hidden behind a standee cutout of Arnold Schwarzenegger or some crap.
Yeah, and then you had it was usually stuck with foreign movies.
Yeah, oh yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. It was mixed in with foreign stuff. In fact, I will say that there are at least half a dozen foreign films that I love because they were next to the anime and just picked it up.
We're not talking about like Blockbuster or no. We're talking about your mom and pop stores.
Yeah,
before Blockbuster, yeah.
And we also have to when we're talking about then, it was probably different for us because we already mentioned that we're all from South Florida. We had a huge disruption to our provider service there when Hurricane Andrew came. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. It definitely changed things. Now I remember, I got my first car right after Andrew because that's when I came of age. Mm-hmm. So to drive, and that. Not only did Andrew take away, Andrew, by the way, for those of you, Hurricane Andrew struck in August of 1992, absolutely decimated South Florida.
Put some respect on his name.
But the thing of it that it did for anime and for anime fans was completely remove all your options for obtaining it.
Yes, for at least a year or two.
It was insanely difficult. You had to drive well over an hour just to find a shop that might carry it because you had to go to North Miami, the only places that had anything.
And we're saying this typically a drive to North Miami is something like maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours.
On a standard day, yeah.
On a standard day.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you're dealing with the Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome Wastelands of Homestead.
Yeah, it took a long time for South Florida to recover. I mean, now Homestead is a huge, bustling city, but
Oh,
yeah, back
geez.
then it was insane. The hurricane hit, and I got a car, and I had no place to go except out of town to go find this stuff. But before that, it was easy enough. Before that, you had Blockbuster Video, and they had just recently opened up. The one in Naranja was near my house, and I was able to go there. That's where I found a ton of anime. I found Warriors of the Wind there, Akira I found there. I think it was the first time I ever watched Akira. Was I pulled it off of their quote unquote animation shelf.
You say it so with so
But
much disdain.
well,
Animation.
and it was right next to the foreign films. But yeah, the animation section, which was basically where they put all the Ralph Bakshi stuff, like Wizards and Fire and Ice, and all these other just stuff they knew they couldn't put by the kids' movies,
Right.
and then they just tossed in little sprinklings of anime.
It's always funny when you know your options are heavy metal and then Akira.
Yes, yes. So before that, that was my go-to. Is I would just go to Blockbuster and pick up what was on the shelves, which 9 times out of 10, like I said, was like Akira, Warriors of the Wind, Robotech, the Boschke stuff, Wizards, Fire and Ice, Felix the Cat, that kind of crazy. And that's how I fell in love with animation, was through that tiny little 2-foot
Window.
shelf. Yeah, it was just this tiny little bit, and everything I knew about animation was coming from that. It wasn't until I think I started after the hurricane that we started getting it more, the animation, and sort of switching it up. I think.
Well, I think licensing got a little better by then, and then some more shops started carrying it.
Yeah, yeah. Before then, it was definitely like your local video store, your Blockbuster would have it on a shelf. I'd mentioned before, like in private, it's My Neighbor Totoro that was released as a kids movie. So you wanted that, it was in the family section. So it came to a point where if it wasn't in the animation section, you had to look for, I don't know, for me anyway, is I started training my eye to look for the style of art, and then I knew what I was looking at. That's how I picked up things like My Neighbor Totoro or Kiki's Delivery Service, was because it was like, oh, wait a minute, this looks like Robotech, but without giant robots. So
Yeah, and that's
and then
that's assuming that the licensing studio that really the studio that released it here didn't botch the artwork on the cover.
oh yeah, Lord knows. Yeah. Case in point, Warriors of the Wind, their cover, horrible. We'll talk about that in that episode.
So
That is a
one
whole
more thing. It's hit for me. I was talking about. I mentioned that why Harlock was so. Why I was drawn to it was because of the fact that they had turned into basically a submarine and boom, boom, boom.
Yeah, because it was bad.
Same way you could possibly have been drawn to Robotech because it was an aircraft carrier. But I loved how they addressed the naval themes in the animation. Second point I wanted to bring back up was that I never really had to deal with the going to find it because you guys were always doing that, and I just like, okay, I'm gonna watch what they're watching. so
well, I got the bug early. I caught the I think it was around, I don't know, 8 years old when I realized that I wanted to draw and be an animator and get involved, and I fell in love with animation as an art form. And then it was in my mind share, like everything about animation. So I wanted to experience all of it, and I wasn't afraid to do that. And my parents, love them to death, were all too eager to let me rent the animation section titles. So I was exposed to these animation film anime a little younger than some of our friends and peers, because of my fascination with the process itself.
So a question for both of you, right? And you can answer it in any order. Of course, it's not like we didn't have animation around us. No, we had G.I. Joe, we had Transformers, we had all of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at some point in time, the Japanese anime became superior to us.
I think I get what you're saying.
Right. I mean,
You're talking about
I think a lot of
that.
that boils down to localization. The original script as opposed to whatever they made up to release here at the time.
but and again,
So
it's not
things
like
like,
we.
how you just brought up, like things like GI Joe, and GI Joe was animated by Toei.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
Technically an anime.
technically, so Transformers animated in Japan as well. Things like that. But their stories, those are aimed towards the U.S. first and animated there, as opposed to, let's say, like Voltron. That localization was pretty much a total bastardization of the story.
So, Brian, if I may, is the question you're asking at what point did we realize we were watching something different?
No. At what point did we realize that was going to be our preferred anime? Because
Oh,
I'm saying this because I honestly can't think of any anime that I was finally drawn back to that was domestically made until Avatar.
I got you.
So at some point in time, we were like, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and
Yeah.
rope text my Project A-Code.
Right.
I'm all around here, and we're growing over here, and we're taking a much more we were, and I think that as a result, it made us, when we say this the mindless musings of the anime nerd. This is where the nerd part came in, because we understand we had a choice. We could have done comic books.
Right.
No, we were really about anime. That's what
Yeah, I
you see
think.
what I'm saying?
Yeah, I go
The
ahead.
media that at some point in time, back in the 90s, early 80s, we just were drawn to. People have choices now. They can do all of them. They can be a Marvel, they can be Naruto, but back then we said, nah, you do the comic books, we're going over this way.
I think for me, because I found comic books right around the same time that I truly found anime. And when I say found anime, I mean it was that point where I realized that this was something different than what I was watching on Saturdays. That this was the themes were more mature, the content wasn't afraid to be bold, and I think that's when I realized that I was watching something different, watching something special. And I found comic books around that same time. And it was, but then it was in my mind, it was this thing where it's like, well, I can read this, which is super awesome, with reading X-Men and and Superman and all that, and said, but this is like an animated comic book, and I think that's something that bears talking about maybe just a tiny bit. Was the quality of anime being brought over was the absolute top of the line, best you've ever seen, and not like, and I mean then versus now, right? Now it doesn't matter. You could have animated this using Adobe Flash and they would release it. Crunchyroll, Netflix, these guys are just like salivating. Give me anything and I'll release it. But back then anime was the detail of the hand-drawn films, like Akira, The Warriors of the Wind, Nausicaa. Those things were so intricate. It was like you were watching a comic book. And I think that's, for me, is when I really got hooked on it. Was that point where I said, you know what, this is all I want to watch. I don't give a damn what He-Man's doing in Eternia next week.
Boom.
All I care about is this.
And everything felt
Animation for TV back then, the cartoon stuff, it was geared to, they needed these 70, 80 something episodes. They needed it as cheap as possible. That way they can make more money off their toys. So the quality wasn't there most of the time. I mean, in a lot of the earlier anime that we had access to, it's like, sure, the quality wasn't the greatest, but it was better than what we were used to at the time.
and to drive this point home is, think about the difference between which would have been the top producer of animation. Let's say Walt Disney.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So Walt Disney, there is a video where they put the Jungle Book and Winnie the Pooh basically side by side, and there is a the animation of basically Mowgli going through the jungle, right? Matches the same animation of Christopher Robin going through the woods.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, they reused a lot of those.
But then on that, you also have like you could do the same thing for like Robin Hood and Aristocrats.
And also the Jungle Book. Oh, Aristocrats.
Yeah, and the Jungle Book, right? So we're again, we have this right here. He-Man had the same thing that would happen, where
yes, only more glaringly bad. Like they absolutely did not care.
Anytime he was always jumping from a high distance down, same animation.
The same sound effect and the same.
They recycled as much as they humanly could.
So
absolutely,
we realized that that's not what we were getting over from anime.
No, and I would argue, and I will fight this fight to the death, that Disney was very clever about it. And yeah, they reused a lot of their stuff, but their stuff was so good.
Yeah, it was so fluid
that they continued. Why reinvent the wheel? It's like, hey, we had these guys animate this dance scene with the monkey and the bear. We're going to use this until we can't use it anymore. But anyway, that notwithstanding, yes, I agree with you. I think it was that. There was this moment where what you were watching was a significantly higher caliber than what we were watching on Saturday mornings. And I mean, that's not true of all things, but it's true of most things we watched as kids.
Right. And
now,
things that were on the air at that time for us down there.
Yeah. Once the 90s hit, the floodgates opened, right? And everything changed. Even American animation changed. I mean, the Disney Afternoon, some excellent animation. Gargoyles.
Oh, my God.
Gargoyles dropped.
Until the final season, but yeah, the rest of it was awesome.
Batman the Animated Series dropped.
Which was,
I remember,
right after Hurricane for us.
Right after the hurricane, yeah. So, I mean, that's those two shows alone, right? Raised the bar for what you could expect from American, I want to say American animation. Even though we all know that that's not exactly what it is. But yeah, we knew the bar had been raised. We knew that we couldn't just deal with He-Man anymore. We couldn't deal with Transformers anymore. This was the next thing.
No,
it was. You know what it was like. Hang on, one more. You know what it was like? It was like watching a whole movie drawn the quality of the anime intro. So, like you watch Thundercats. Thundercats, quite possibly, in my opinion, one of the greatest intros for a cartoon ever made. But the rest of the show didn't look like that.
No, nowhere near.
The intro was the and anime was like watching the intro for 90 minutes. Blew my mind.
I got it.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly.
Another then versus now. And maybe we could call this as a segment, or maybe we can ask the audience when we release it and say, when do you think? I really want to go back to that whole protagonist dilemma.
Okay.
Right.
Sure.
Yu-Gi-Oh. Right. Yu-Gi-Oh was the last protagonist I know that remained undefeated. Anime now, they all have to learn the hubris of defeat. And I understand why they're doing it, but you can almost know exactly when it's going to come and when it's going to happen. You can almost predict it. And I think that's the thing about anime that's now, it's becoming predictable.
Sure. But is that because it's becoming predictable, or because you've been exposed to so much of it that now you're just seeing the patterns?
I think it's probably a little bit of both.
Hmm?
I mean, you'll get one nowadays where it's, it leads you in a certain direction, and then the very next season, it just literally, makes a U-turn and goes in totally opposite direction. It's like, I wasn't expecting that, and that draws the audience now. But back then, it was more along the lines. It was a cookie cutter formula, but it worked for the most part. It's like you had a show, you have your protagonist, they're going through stuff, and at least with anime, as opposed to what was available on broadcast U.S. television, it tended to be, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? It tended to be, I don't want to say realistic, but it had more themes for people to relate to.
Yeah,
Whereas broadcast TV, they rarely ever dealt with death.
sure.
So with anime, you dealt with death, and sometimes quite often.
And you
You'll
deal with
notice the
defeat.
protagonist being depressed about it
My
and
dog
whatnot.
Neji. My dog Neji.
Yeah, things like that. It's like, in US, for US serialized animation, it wasn't really a thing back then.
I think that was legally mandated. I don't want to say for sure, and a listener can clue me in on that, but I feel like a lot of that was legally mandated. Like you had to have
Yeah,
a moral, you had to have the evil could never triumph, those kinds of
yeah,
things.
I don't think it was legally mandated, but there were groups that made
Yeah.
sure that it happened that way, or they'd give the studios a really, really hard
The
time.
closest death we only had two. Well, one death we had to deal with was Optimus Prime.
Sure,
Right.
and that one hit a lot of us,
Okay,
mostly because they killed off freaking everybody.
it's like
Oh
they
wow!
killed off all
Yeah.
my toys.
They
All my
wiped the
toys
whole
are dead.
place clean. But then we also had to deal with, like, on the flip side, in GI Joe. Man, I like when Duke got pierced.
Gasp.
Yeah.
God, okay, so I told Rick, I literally just watched the G.I. Joe movie again, like, uh, 3 or 4 weekends
Uh
ago.
huh.
Oh, that's great.
It
I'm
showed
glad
up
you've
in
got a
my
fresh
YouTube
perspective.
playlist, and I'm like, oh, why not watch it? And then I went, led me down this rabbit hole, and apparently Duke was supposed to die originally,
Here's it now.
but
I
then
feel
with
like
the way, the uproar for your toys dying for the Transformers movie, they actually changed it. That's how
I
Duke ended up with a snake in the heart and still managed to survive.
I absolutely believe that to be true. It's that there's nobody can convince me otherwise. Because yes, of course, Transformers, that movie, like, it wrecked kids. Kids were pissed. I was pissed.
It's like, I need
So
all new toys. All mine are dead.
To
yeah,
this day,
so
I will, if I see Magnus Prime, punch him in his to this day.
I if I hear Stan Bush's "The Touch" cue up, I already know that I'm in for the feels. It's just
That
yeah.
is.
So it
I
messed us
want.
up.
We need to have an episode about that. Just soundtracks.
Sure, absolutely. You want to talk about music?
I
We'll talk about
get to
music.
tell you. I
Perfect.
get to tell my story.
Even grab the vinyl.
I get to tell my story.
All right. So
Jesus, Brian.
I think I think this is probably a good place for us to wrap this up for our first episode. As you can see, the differences between then and now, astronomically different. Availability, just in and of itself, um, quality of work, just notwithstanding either, just completely different. Guys, you have any final thoughts?
I didn't realize how much this needed to be done. And I'm saying this as people don't realize that the first people to they stand on our shoulders. You know, if you're watching anything anime now and it is mainstream, there is a whole legion of people who received wedgies, who people who got swirlies. where it was not cool, and I am so happy for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, being a teenager, a young adult, and just being that kid, the cartoon kid, like that was not
Oh no, it
did
was just bad news for yourself back then.
did not go over well. We were absolutely a niche group of people who were the weird ones, the odd ones out. You know, we were. I would argue, and you can fight me on this if you want. I would argue anime nerds in the 80s and 90s were more chastised than even comic book nerds.
I would think so because
Oh,
cartoons back then had the stigma of being just for kids, and well, you're a 16-year-old in high school, you shouldn't be a kid, and so it was just that bad stigma, and it just led for a bad day quite often.
quite often. I don't think we ever need to drop in there because I don't want nobody to be triggered by it. But I just need to say that I am so. I we did this. We.
Yeah, I would. I mean, obviously not the three of us in South Florida, but collectively, our generation, our specific subgroup of fanatics,
Our fellow
the
older
one,
weebs.
yes, the ones of us who were willing to take the ridicule because we knew what we were watching was something just world changing. Even if we didn't fully understand what it would become, because Lord knows if you would tell me from 1991 or 1990 that this was going to blow up the way it did, whew, I'd have made some serious stock decisions when I hit 18.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
So yeah, I think we're gonna take this moment to wrap up our very first episode. You've just been privy to the mindless midlife musings of the anime nerd. Vic, where can people find you online?
Well, most often than not, you don't. But it's like you can find me under my Muppets handle on Twitter at kaiju_geek grotto. That's kaiju_geek GRTTO. And there you'll see
Awesome.
me repost a lot of gaming, a lot of anime. I answer almost everything as long as it's not, super strange.
Completely asking. And just before we get to you, Brian, we're also going to make sure that we have a website for you to access. Obviously, this is our very first episode, so none of all this is completely hashed out, but guaranteed by end of next recording, we'll have some addresses for you and whatnot. But in the interim, Brian, how do we stalk you?
Well, that would be the first time that has ever happened, and I'm looking forward to it. So you can find me on Instagram at skits1914. That's SKITZ 1914. You can follow me. I probably don't post on there until I decide to. Or you can find me where I'm really on Facebook. You can look up our DJ company, Team Ruckus, DJ Skits and Halo. You can find us there.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. And so in our next episode, we'll be talking about the biggest, baddest anime of all time, Akira, the 1988 classic anime that paved the way for the growth of anime worldwide. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast app, please subscribe, follow, like, heart, whatever the it is you're supposed to do on those. And maybe also give us a review if you can.
Review is great.
Until then, yeah, reviews, please. Until then, folks, keep calm and watch more anime.
Yeah.
Sure.